Have you ever thought that a woman once called an angel by all of South Korea could become the most ruthless killer? A bizarre marriage, the husband living in a basement in poverty, the wife in a luxurious house. A drowning accident occurring exactly 4 hours before an 800 million won insurance policy expired. Coincidence or a perfect murder plot calculated over many years? Today, we'll explore a shocking case that overshadowed even South Korea's presidential election with its horrifying details. Welcome to the Case Files, where we explore the most intriguing and shocking criminal cases from around the world. Today, we're traveling back to South Korea in 2019 to uncover a case that sparked an unprecedented nationwide manhunt. This is a story of false love, unbridled greed, and the death of a kind-hearted man who trusted the wrong person. In this episode, we're taking a deep dive into the infamous case of the fallen angel, the fatal marriage, and the 800 million won plot. A case that will make you question the nature of humanity and the fragile line between good and evil. Beginning of a tragedy. On June 30th, 2019, Gapyeong Valley, a popular tourist spot about an hour's drive from Seoul, welcomed weekend visitors with its crystal-clear waters and cool air. This is where many Korean families choose to camp and enjoy peaceful moments with nature. Around 3 p.m. that day, a group of 7 friends arrived at the valley to have fun. Among them was Yoon-sang-yeop, 39, a gentle molecular biology engineer with round eyes behind thick glasses. Yoon worked at a major company with a stable income of 64 million won per year, a middle-class income level in South Korea. He was quiet, hard-working, and regarded by colleagues as reliable. Beside Yoon was his wife, Lee Eun-hae, 28, with her beautiful appearance, bright smile, and lively personality. At first glance, they looked like a happy couple enjoying a normal weekend getaway. But if you looked closer, there were strange things. Except for Lee Eun-hae, Yoon didn't know anyone else in the group. They were all his wife's friends. Even stranger, among these men were 2 who were having affairs with his wife, Cho Hyun-soo, 30, and someone called A. These relationships had been going on throughout Yoon and Lee's marriage, but the kind-hearted husband seemed completely unaware. The first suspicious signs. As soon as they arrived at the valley, Lee's friends started inviting Yoon to swim. This was extremely strange, because everyone knew Yoon couldn't swim and had a terrible fear of water. Since childhood, he had been afraid of water and never participated in any water activities. Yoon politely but firmly refused. However, what surprised everyone was that Lee Eun-hae, his wife, was the one most aggressively pushing her husband to get in the water. She kept saying, "Come on, get in, it's just for fun. Don't disappoint everyone." In the video recorded at 6 p.m., you could clearly see Yoon in a state of real panic. He kept pleading, "Don't do this. Don't force me. I'm really afraid of water." His voice was trembling, his face pale. But no one in the group cared about his fear. Most notably, on the shore, Lee Eun-hae not only failed to comfort her husband, but laughed gleefully when she saw him panicking. That smile wasn't the loving smile of a wife, but rather the smile of someone enjoying another's suffering. This video was later posted online and attracted over 5 million views within a week, causing Korean public opinion to be extremely outraged by Lee Eun-hae's cruel attitude. The fatal night. At 8 p.m., darkness had fallen over Gapyeong Valley. The light from the lamps was very dim. Visibility was severely limited. Everyone had prepared their belongings to go home after a day of fun. But right then, Lee Eun-hae suddenly made a suggestion that surprised everyone. "Why don't we dive into the water one last time at night? It'll be a really interesting experience." This was an extremely dangerous proposal. Diving at night in an area without adequate lighting, with people who weren't professional divers. But strangely, 4 out of 5 people immediately agreed to this proposal. Only one person refused. That was Yoon. He begged, "Honey, it's already dark. I can't see anything underwater. I'm really scared. Let's go home." But the pressure from the group was too great. Lee Eun-hae, Cho Hyun-soo, and the others kept persuading and pressuring him. They said Yoon lacked courage, was disappointing everyone, didn't know how to have fun. Finally, under pressure from his wife and her friends, Yoon was forced to agree to participate. Notably, the first 2 people to enthusiastically agree with Lee's proposal, Cho Hyun-soo and A, were her secret lovers. Was this a prearrangement, accident, or conspiracy? According to the group's testimony, Cho Hyun-soo and A jumped from a rock about 4 meters high into a water area about 3 meters deep first. Then they coaxed Yoon, who couldn't swim and was in a state of panic, to also jump without any safety equipment. Yoon fell into the water and immediately went into a state of panic. He struggled violently, crying out desperately for help. According to the autopsy results later, Yoon's lungs had a lot of air bubbles, proving he fought to survive for a long time underwater. But strangely, Lee Eun-hae, the person closest to her husband, only about 5 meters away, claimed she didn't hear his cries for help. Meanwhile, another person on the trip, standing much farther away, insisted they heard what seemed to be Yoon's cries. By basic logic, at a distance of only 5 meters, in the relatively quiet space of the valley at night, not hearing the desperate cries for help of a drowning person is completely illogical. Moreover, police later discovered that Lee Eun-hae was actually a very good swimmer. So why didn't a skilled swimmer go down to save her drowning husband right before her eyes? Finally, when rescue forces arrived, they found Yoon's body. Because they found no signs of external impact, police initially concluded this was an accidental drowning. Or the mystery of timing. What made investigators most suspicious was the timing of the accident. After studying the insurance contracts, they discovered an unbelievable coincidence. Yoon died at 8:24 p.m. on June 30th, 2019. But according to the insurance policy terms, if the renewal premium wasn't paid on time, all insurance policies would automatically cancel at midnight the same day, meaning just 4 hours after Yoon died. In other words, if Yoon had lived 4 more hours without paying the renewal premium, all $800 million won in insurance money would have been lost. But because he died before this time, Lee Eun-hae became the legal beneficiary of the entire amount. This could be the most miraculous coincidence in history, or an extremely sophisticated, calculated plan. Insurance company's suspicion. When Lee Eun-hae submitted a claim request, the insurance company immediately felt something was wrong. They conducted an investigation and discovered many suspicious signs. The timing of death coincided too perfectly with the insurance expiration. Yoon was very afraid of water, but drowned. Lee showed no grief and lived very comfortably after her husband's death. Based on these findings, the insurance company refused to pay and began investigating Yoon's death more deeply. Lee Eun-hae turns to the media. Being denied insurance payment, Lee Eun-hae felt angry. In November 2019, she decided to approach the famous investigative TV program Unanswered Questions on SBS to accuse the insurance company of fraud. On air, Lee presented herself as a pitiful victim. She cried, telling about her difficult life after her husband's death, about having to live on social welfare in an empty house. She said she and her husband always had deep, loving feelings, and the insurance company's refusal to pay had left her in desperate circumstances. The program crew was initially very sympathetic to Lee. They decided to support her in demanding justice from the insurance company, and began investigating the case. The broadcaster's investigation and horrifying discoveries. But when investigative reporters began digging deeper, they discovered things completely opposite to Lee Eun-hae's account. First discovery: Lee wasn't living in poverty as she claimed. In fact, she still frequently traveled, dined lavishly, shopped for luxury goods, and hung out with friends. Second discovery: Lee and Yoon's marriage was nothing like she described. Through interviewing acquaintances, the program crew discovered this was an extremely strange and abnormal marriage. Third discovery: Yoon actually lived in poverty after marriage, despite having a stable salary. He frequently had to borrow money from colleagues to buy basic food. Fourth discovery: Lee had affairs with at least 2 other men throughout the marriage, and these people were all present on the fatal trip. The strange marital life exposed. When delving into the couple's life, investigators discovered a picture completely different from what Lee Eun-hae had told. Yoon and Lee married in 2016, but this wasn't a normal marriage. They didn't hold a wedding or reception, just quietly registered their marriage at a notary office. After marriage, Yoon's parents gave the couple 100 million won to buy a house. Yoon also borrowed an additional 40 million won to buy a fairly spacious and comfortable house. But Lee didn't allow her husband to live in this new house. Instead, she forced Yoon to rent a small basement room near his company to live alone. The new house was entirely for Lee to invite friends over to gather and have fun. They only met on weekends, and only when Lee wanted. Yoon never got to meet his wife's family. In fact, Lee's family and friends didn't even know she was married. When hanging out with friends, Lee introduced Yoon as a close older brother, not her husband. Brutal financial control. The most horrifying discovery was how Lee controlled Yoon's finances. Although Yoon had a stable salary of 64 million won per year, he had to hand over his entire salary to his wife. Lee would then decide how much money to give her husband for monthly expenses. Yoon's colleagues shared that after marriage, he became completely different. Before, Yoon never had to borrow money from anyone, but after getting married, he frequently had to borrow small amounts that were pitifully small. There were times Yoon had to borrow 3,000 won, about $2.50, to buy a bowl of instant noodles because he was hungry. Sometimes he borrowed money to buy a bottle of water. This meant that Yoon, an engineer with stable income, didn't have enough money to cover the most basic living needs. Police later released text messages between Yoon and colleagues that caused Korean public opinion to be extremely outraged. I transferred all my salary to Eun-hae, and now I'm completely broke. Can you transfer 10,000 won to me? I have nowhere left to borrow money to buy a lunchbox and water. Yoon even lost significant weight, losing 14 kilograms in just 2 weeks due to lack of food. The car that Yoon bought was also taken over by Lee for her use, but the monthly installment payments and gas were still Yoon's responsibility. The suspicious insurance plan. During 2 years of living together, Lee had mined about 200 million won from Yoon with various excuses. But the most frightening thing was that she had started planning to kill her husband right from when they first got married. 5 months after their wedding, in August 2017, Lee purchased up to 6 life insurance policies for Yoon, with a total value of 800 million won. What was unusual was that all these insurance policies had Lee as the sole beneficiary. When she lacked money to pay insurance premiums, Lee coaxed and forced Yoon to pay the remaining amounts. Yoon had no idea he was paying for insurance policies that would make him a murder target. Every month, Yoon had to pay up to 700,000 won in insurance premiums, a large amount compared to what he was allowed to spend on himself. This made his life even more difficult, while Lee enjoyed a luxurious life with her husband's money. The dark past of the angel. To better understand Lee Eun-hae, investigators dug into her past. They discovered a tragic story about the fall of an angel. Lee Eun-hae was born in February 1991 in Incheon to a poor family. Both her parents were disabled, living in a dilapidated house of only 20 square meters. The family lived on social welfare. In 2002, when Lee was 11, the famous home renovation program Love House selected her family for a special episode. On television, Lee appeared as a lovely, obedient, and very filial girl. Despite living in difficult circumstances, she remained very optimistic and never complained about life. What impressed viewers most was Lee's promise. "When I grow up, I will try to help people in difficult circumstances like my family." The program aired and caused a big sensation. Lee was loved by the Korean public and called South Korea's angel. But time passed, and the angel disappeared. From age 15, while still in high school, Lee began dating various men. She quickly learned how to use her appearance and charm to make money from men. Relationship with a criminal. In the following years, Lee became acquainted with Cho Hyun-soo, a man with a criminal record. Cho Hyun-soo was a familiar face at police stations for frequently stealing and robbing people's property. Since youth, he had appeared in court 5 times for various charges. Lee and Cho developed an illicit romantic relationship that lasted many years. Cho became Lee's effective accomplice in scamming and making money from male victims. From 2010 to 2016, Lee had romantic relationships with various men. What's frightening is that some of these people died in mysterious accidents, and Lee received large insurance payouts each time. Previous murder attempts. The most horrifying thing police discovered was that Lee had attempted to kill Yoon at least 2 times before the fatal drowning. First attempt, February 2019. Lee invited Yoon to a B&B in Gangwon Province for a belated honeymoon. There, she tried to poison her husband by mixing pufferfish blood and testicles into his food. Pufferfish contains tetrodotoxin, an extremely dangerous toxin that can cause death with just a very small amount. Fortunately, Yoon only got stomachache and vomiting. He was taken to the hospital and recovered after a few days of treatment. Second attempt, May 2019. Lee invited Yoon fishing at a fishing pond in the Seoul suburbs. While fishing, Yoon accidentally slipped and fell into the pond. Fortunately, another fisherman nearby jumped in and saved Yoon in time. After 2 unsuccessful murder attempts, Lee decided to plan a more perfect third attempt. Shocking video and public attention. When the Unanswered Questions program aired in December 2020, all of South Korea was shocked. Their investigative video quickly became the most viewed content online and caused uproar across all social media. Especially the video footage showing Yoon pleading not to go into the water while Lee laughed gleefully outraged millions of Koreans. This video got over 5 million views in just 1 week. Korean public opinion erupted. Hashtags about this case became trending #1 on all social media. People demanded police reinvestigate the case and punish Lee Eun-hae. Official investigation and arrest warrant. From here, Korean police decided to reopen the investigation into the drowning at Gapyeong Valley. The Incheon District Prosecutor's Office also joined with strong investigative forces. Police spent 9 months investigating, and results showed this wasn't an accident, but an organized murder. Decrypted telegram messages showed Lee had planned to kill Yoon for a long time. On December 13, 2021, the Incheon District Prosecutor's Office officially summoned Lee Eun-hae and Cho Hyun-soo for questioning. However, after the first interrogation session, both were temporarily released home and ordered not to leave the area. This was a serious mistake by police. That very night, Lee and Cho fled their homes and disappeared completely. Nationwide manhunt. On March 30, 2022, Korean police officially issued a nationwide arrest warrant for Lee Eun-hae and Cho Hyun-soo. This was one of the most watched manhunts in Korean history. The whole country followed this pursuit. Photos of the two suspects were posted everywhere. All banking, transportation, and communication activities were closely monitored. During 3 weeks on the run, Lee and Cho lived like homeless people. They didn't dare use bank cards, didn't dare contact anyone, and had to hide in different places each night. Finally, they decided to hide in an abandoned office building in downtown Seoul. On April 16, 2022, police received a phone call from Lee Eun-hae's father reporting the two's hiding location. When arrested, both were in pitifully haggard condition. They had lost a lot of weight, their faces gaunt from living only on bottled water for many days. Seoul trial and historic verdict. After arrest, Lee Eun-hae and Cho Hyun-soo were transferred to the Incheon District Prosecutor's Office to begin the trial process. This was considered one of the most watched trials in Korean legal history. Throughout the interrogation process, Lee constantly cried and denied all charges. She insisted she was innocent, that Yoon's death was truly a regrettable accident. She even declared that she truly loved her husband and never intended to kill him for insurance money. However, the evidence collected by police and prosecutors was overwhelming. Decrypted telegram messages, surveillance videos from multiple locations, witness testimonies, autopsy results, and financial analysis all pointed to one conclusion. This was an organized, planned, and extremely brutal murder. In October 2022, Incheon District Court issued its first instance verdict. Lee Eun-hae, life imprisonment for murder to seize property, insurance fraud, and domestic violence. She must also wear an electronic location tracking device for 20 years. Cho Hyun-soo, 30 years imprisonment for complicity in murder and insurance fraud. Also must wear a tracking device for 20 years. In court, the judge gave harsh rebukes. Defendant Lee Eun-hae turned marriage, the most sacred thing for humans, into a murder weapon to satisfy her greed. The defendant took the life of a kind, honest man just for money. This is an unforgivable crime. Lee and Cho both appealed, but didn't stop blaming each other. In April 2023, Seoul High Court heard the appeal and upheld the original verdict. Finally, in September 2023, South Korea's Supreme Court officially upheld the verdict. Lee Eun-hae, life imprisonment. Cho Hyun-soo, 30 years imprisonment. Both must wear electronic location tracking devices for 20 years. This was the first time in Korean history a woman was sentenced to life imprisonment for killing her husband to seize insurance money. The verdict was considered fair and appropriate for the brutality of the crime. Other accomplices also prosecuted. Besides Lee and Cho, another man named A, 32 years old, who was also present on the fatal trip, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for aiding and abetting murder. The appeals court emphasized, although only aiding and abetting, the defendant's role in the case was not small. The defendant knew Lee intended to kill Yoon, but didn't prevent it, even participating in pressuring the victim to jump into the water. Conclusion. The Lee Eun-hae case, from South Korea's angel to brutal killer, is a tragic story about human downfall and the power of greed. From a lovely 11-year-old girl with the promise to help people in difficulty when I grow up, Lee Eun-hae became one of the most terrifying criminals in Korean history. She turned love into a weapon, turned marriage into a death trap, and turned a kind man's trust into a path to death. Yoon Sang-yeop, with clear eyes behind thick glasses and a gentle smile, paid with his very life for blind trust. He lived his final years in poverty, exploited, and ultimately murdered by the very person he loved most. His story is a painful warning about how blind love can become. But this case also shows the light of justice. The Unanswered Questions program proved that independent journalism can be a voice for those who cannot protect themselves. Korean public opinion showed strong solidarity in demanding justice for the victim. Finally, justice was served. Lee Eun-hae and her accomplices received appropriate punishment. But the pain of the victim's family, the loss of an innocent life, can never be compensated. Lessons from the case: warning signs of economic violence in families, complete control of partners' finances, isolating victim from family and friends, creating financial dependence, using emotions to manipulate. Things to note: never hand over all finances to one person, even if it's your spouse. Maintain relationships with family and friends. Be cautious of unusually valuable insurance contracts. Trust your instincts when you feel something isn't right. As we end this story, remember that in life, kindness and trust are precious values. But we also need to know how to protect ourselves. Love wisely, trust carefully, and always listen to your instincts. Thank you all for following the case files today. If this story means something to you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other intriguing cases. Leave a comment to let us know which case you want to learn about in the next episode. And don't forget, in this world full of mysteries, only truth can bring justice. We'll see you again in the next episode of the Case Files. Take care and always be careful. And always. Hong Kong, February 2023. In an abandoned house in the suburbs, 2 large pots were boiling on the stove, giving off a thick, foul odor. When police lifted the lids, they discovered not animal meat, but a human head being boiled with radishes and carrots. In the refrigerator, 2 severed legs were neatly placed next to fresh groceries. Electric saws, industrial meat grinders, cleavers, and blood-stained gloves were scattered throughout the room, which was sealed with plastic tarps. This wasn't the scene from a horror movie. This was the brutal truth that shocked Hong Kong and the world. Welcome to the Case Files, where we unlock the dark mysteries hidden deep within real-life criminal cases. Today, we're stepping into one of the most brutal and shocking cases in modern Hong Kong history. In this episode, we're taking a deep dive into the infamous case of the murder of Abby Choi, when kindness nurtured a monster. This is the story of a young millionaire, a fashion icon with a glamorous life, who was brutally betrayed by the very people she had loved and generously supported. A case driven by bottomless greed, where family ties became tools of murder, and where justice is still trying to fill the remaining gaps. Let's turn the pages of this case file together. Part 1. The Victim and Her Brilliant Life. Hong Kong, a city of contradictions. February 2023, Hong Kong remained one of the busiest financial centers in the world. Skyscrapers soared high above Victoria Harbor, endless streams of people moved about, and neon lights created a picture of prosperity. But behind that glamour, a bloody tragedy was waiting to explode, a tragedy of greed, betrayal, and the ultimate cruelty of human nature. Abby Choi, a woman at the peak of fame. Abby Choi Tin Fung was born in 1994 into a wealthy family in mainland China. Her family's fortune was estimated to be worth hundreds of millions of Hong Kong dollars. Standing 5'1", tall and weighing about 88 pounds, with a delicate face and radiant smile, she quickly became an icon in Hong Kong's fashion scene. She frequently appeared in prestigious magazines like Vogue and L'Officiel, and was a regular guest at Paris Fashion Week. People called her Hong Kong's IT girl, someone who always led trends and lived an enviable life. But behind the spotlight, Abby Choi was also a devoted mother and a woman with a generous heart. She married for the first time at just 18 to Alex Kwang Kong-chi, a young man without stable employment. The marriage brought her 2 children, a boy and a girl. However, the relationship didn't last, and they divorced in 2017, though they remarried and later separated again. A new marriage and a fateful decision. After her divorce, Abby Choi found new happiness with Chris Tam, the son of the founder of the famous Tam Jai Yunnan Mixian restaurant chain. In 2016, they held a lavish wedding. With Chris Tam, she had 2 more children. Life at this point seemed perfect: a warm family, a thriving career, and enormous wealth. What was remarkable was that despite having a new life, Abby Choi never abandoned her responsibilities to her ex-husband's family. Out of love for her 2 older children, she wanted them to continue living in the best conditions and be cared for by their paternal family. For this reason, she took actions that many considered overly generous, even thoughtless. Generous actions misplaced. In 2020, Abby Choi spent over 70 million Hong Kong dollars, equivalent to more than 220 billion Vietnamese dong, or about 9 million USD, to purchase a luxury apartment in Kadoorie Hill, one of Hong Kong's most expensive and prestigious areas. She bought this apartment for her 2 older children and her ex-husband's family to live in. For legal convenience, she put her ex-father-in-law, Kwang Kao, as the registered owner on the property documents. Not only that, she also hired her ex-husband's older brother, Anthony Kwang Kong-kit, as her personal driver with a generous salary. Every month, she provided her ex-husband's family with a large sum of money to cover their living expenses. She even maintained close relationships with them, frequently having dinner and traveling together like a family. Chris Tam, her current husband, fully knew about and supported his wife's actions. He once shared that he loved Abby Choi precisely because of her kindness and caring heart toward everyone around her. He treated her 2 older children as his own. But Abby Choi's boundless kindness became fertile ground for nurturing greed and envy. The Kwang family gradually became accustomed to living parasitically, viewing her financial support as an entitlement. And when that source of income was threatened, they didn't hesitate to turn her kindness into a double-edged sword. Part 2. The Criminal Family. The Poisoned Ones. Kwang Kao, the cold-blooded mastermind. Kwang Kao, 65 years old at the time of the crime, was identified as the mastermind. He was a former Hong Kong police sergeant who had served in the force for many years. This meant he understood investigative procedures, police methods for solving cases, and knew how to cover up criminal evidence professionally. However, Kwang Kao's career ended disgracefully in 2005 when he was forced to resign due to involvement in a serious rape case. This incident left an indelible stain on his record and revealed his morally corrupt nature. After being kicked out of the police force, Kwang Kao had no stable job. He lived off financial support from his ex-daughter-in-law, Abby Choi. The $1 million apartment in his name became his pride and his only source of financial security. 4. Alex Kwang Kong-chi, the unemployed fraudster. Alex Kwang, 28 years old, Kwang Kao's second son and Abby Choi's ex-husband, was not a trustworthy man. He was unemployed and lived completely dependent on his ex-wife's financial support. Not only lazy, Alex was also a fraudster with a criminal record. From 2013 to 2015, he was involved in a major fraud scheme related to gold investment, defrauding multiple victims of approximately 5 million Hong Kong dollars, about 16 billion Vietnamese dong, or roughly 640,000 USD. After being arrested and released on bail pending trial, he fled and lived outside the law for many years. Hong Kong police issued an arrest warrant for him starting in 2015. During all that time, Alex Kwong still lived comfortably thanks to Abby Choi's financial support. He had no intention of becoming independent, working honestly, or worrying about his two children's future. To him, Abby Choi was a golden goose that he had to keep at all costs. Anthony Kwong Kong-kit, the betrayer of trust. Anthony Kwong, 31 years old, Alex's older brother, didn't have a better life. He was mired in debt and had no stable job. Being hired by Abby Choi as her personal driver was a golden opportunity, giving him an easy job with high pay. In his role as personal driver, Anthony was in the closest position to the victim. He knew her daily schedule, where she usually went, and whom she met. Abby Choi completely trusted Anthony, treating him like family. But that absolute trust was betrayed in the most brutal way when he drove his benefactor to her death. Jenny Lee Sui-hung, the mother who concealed the crime. Jenny Lee, 63 years old, Abby Choi's ex-mother-in-law, was also drowning in debt and had filed for bankruptcy. She lived off her ex-daughter-in-law's financial support and considered the Kadoorie Hill apartment as her family's property. Although she didn't directly participate in the murder and dismemberment, her role in concealing, destroying evidence, and attempting to mislead the investigation showed her complicity and cold-blooded nature. She deleted text messages, urged her sons to flee, and even called Abby Choi's mother to ask her to remain silent before police. The last straw, the million-dollar apartment dispute. The seeds of the crime truly sprouted in late 2022 when Abby Choi decided to sell the luxury apartment in Kadoorie Hill. This decision made complete business sense. She wanted to reinvest the proceeds into other projects with higher returns. With her inherent kindness, Abby Choi had no intention of leaving her ex-husband's family homeless. She had promised to find and buy them another house. However, in the eyes of the Kwong family, this action was a direct threat to their interests. They had grown accustomed to living luxuriously in one of Hong Kong's most expensive areas. Selling the house meant losing an enormous asset that they considered their own. Especially Kwong Kao, whose name was on the ownership documents, reacted extremely violently. He had heated arguments with Abby Choi multiple times. Witnesses heard him threaten, "If you sell the house without arranging proper accommodation for us, I will kill you." Those threats weren't empty words. Facing the risk of losing the million-dollar apartment, the criminal mind of former police officer Kwong Kao began plotting a vicious plan. Instead of resolving the dispute through legal means, he chose the most cold-blooded path. If he couldn't keep the property, he had to eliminate its owner. Camille. And there was one particularly important detail. Abby Choi and Chris Tam had not officially registered their marriage. This meant that if she died, all her assets would belong to her children, including the 2 children she shared with Alex Kwong. And the legal guardian of these 2 children was Alex, their biological father. Thus, if Abby Choi died, Alex and his family could control her entire enormous fortune through the 2 children. This was the real motive behind the case. Not just the Kadoorie Hill apartment, but an entire fortune worth hundreds of millions of Hong Kong dollars. Part 3. The Brutal Act, the Day of Fate. February 21st, 2023, walking into the trap. February 21st, 2023, started like any ordinary day for Abby Choi. She had an appointment to take her daughter to dance class at 4 p.m., but she would never show up for that appointment. At 2 p.m., Anthony Kwong, the personal driver she trusted completely, called her under the pretense of needing to take her to see a house in the Lung Mei Tsuen area of Tai Po, a suburb of Hong Kong. He said this was a potential house that could replace the Kadoorie Hill apartment. This made perfect sense to Abby Choi, since she had promised to find a new place for her ex-husband's family. Without any suspicion, she got into the car driven by Anthony. The vehicle carried her away from central Hong Kong, heading toward the remote suburban area. It was the final journey in the life of a talented and kind-hearted 28-year-old woman. The House of Death. The house in Lungmae-tsuan was not an ordinary house. This was a 3-story building that had been abandoned, located in a deserted area far from residential zones. It was rented by the Kwong father and son starting in October 2022, precisely when Abby Choi began mentioning selling the Kaduri Hill apartment. Over the following 4 months, they secretly transformed this house into a complete torture chamber and body disposal facility. Windows were sealed shut. Walls and floors were covered, with thick plastic tarps for easy cleanup of blood and body tissue. They purchased industrial equipment, electric saws, meat grinders, large knives, rubber gloves, and many other tools. When Abby Choi entered that house, she walked into a trap that had been meticulously prepared for months. So in the final moments, the exact details of what happened to Abby Choi inside that house have not been fully disclosed by Hong Kong police. However, from the crime scene and initial suspect statements, forensic experts reconstructed the sequence of events. As soon as Abby Choi entered the house, she was attacked unexpectedly from behind. According to the forensic report, the direct cause of death was severe head trauma. She may have been struck or attacked with a hard object to the head, causing her to lose the ability to resist. Police believe she died on February 21st, just hours after leaving her home. After she died, the truly horrific crime began. The crime after death. Brutal dismemberment. What happened next was one of the most savage acts in Hong Kong's criminal history. With his experience as a former police officer, Kwong Kao knew that an intact corpse would be easily discovered. He needed to destroy all traces, turning this beautiful woman into unidentifiable fragments. They used electric saws to cut Abby Choi's body into many parts. According to the forensic report, the body was divided into at least 108 small pieces. Large body parts like the head, legs, and arms were all separated. Pieces of flesh and bone were minced using an industrial meat grinder. To conceal the stench and disfigure the body parts, they cooked some portions in 2 large pots, mixing them with vegetables like radishes and carrots. When police discovered the scene, the 2 pots were still boiling on the stove, giving off the distinctive foul odor of decomposing human protein. Other body parts were wrapped tightly in plastic bags and stored in the refrigerator, waiting to be processed further. Small bone fragments were crushed and may have been discarded or prepared for disposal. But they made one critical mistake. Despite their detailed planning, the criminals still made a major error. They couldn't hide their tracks. Abby Choi was a famous person, and her sudden disappearance immediately caused a stir. Furthermore, her broken promise to take her daughter to dance class became the first warning signal. Her family and friends immediately reported her missing to the police. Part 4. The Investigation, When Truth Comes to Light. February 24th, a chilling discovery. Just 3 days after Abby Choi went missing, Hong Kong police had important leads. They investigated her last phone calls and quickly traced them to Anthony Kwong, the person who had picked her up on the afternoon of February 24th. When checking records, police discovered Anthony was connected to a house in Lungmae-tsuan, Tai Po. On February 24th, a Hong Kong police tactical unit raided the house. The scene they witnessed made even seasoned police officers shudder in horror. 2 large pots were still boiling on the gas stove. When they opened the lids, they realized this wasn't normal food. Inside was a human head being boiled, with skin and flesh already decomposed and peeling, mixed with various vegetables. In the refrigerator, they found 2 human legs cut neatly, still intact from the knees down to the feet. Fingers and fingernails were found in separate plastic bags. Ribs, pelvic bones, and many other body fragments were scattered throughout the house. Electric saws, meat grinders, large knives, rubber gloves, and blood-stained plastic tarps were everywhere. The entire house reeked of the terrible stench of blood and decomposing human flesh. This wasn't just a murder. It was a premeditated massacre executed with unbelievable brutality. Identifying the victim. Initially, police couldn't accurately identify the victim because the body had been dismembered and destroyed so severely. However, forensic experts used DNA comparison methods from remaining tissue samples and cross-referenced them with dental records. The results confirmed the victim was Abby Choi. This news exploded like a bomb, shocking all of Hong Kong and the world. Arresting the suspects. Within 24 hours of discovering the crime scene, Hong Kong police launched a massive manhunt. Anthony Kwong was arrested at his parents' house. His parents, Kwong Kao and Jenny Lee, were also arrested immediately afterward. However, Alex Kwong, the main suspect and the victim's ex-husband, had already fled. He knew the case was about to be exposed. With help from his lover Pang Wanyi, a 29-year-old model, he had planned to escape to mainland China and then to other countries. The tense chase. Hong Kong police immediately blocked all border crossings and seaports. They issued an international red notice for Alex Kwong. His image and information were broadcast across all media outlets. On February 25th, police received a tip about a suspicious man hiding in an area near the sea in Tung Chung, near Hong Kong International Airport. A tactical team was immediately dispatched. He tried to hide in a small boat, planning to sail to the mainland, but police discovered and surrounded him in time. Alex Kwong was arrested along with his lover Pang Wanyi and another man named Lau Wing-yi, who had been hired to take him by boat. When arrested, Alex Kwong was wearing black clothes, a hat, and a mask, trying to conceal his face. In his luggage, police found a large amount of cash, passports, and fake documents. Contradictory testimonies. During interrogation, the suspects gave contradictory statements. Initially, Anthony Kwong denied all accusations, claiming he only drove for Abby Choi and knew nothing about the incident. But when confronted with forensic evidence from the crime scene, he changed his testimony. Alex Kwong also claimed innocence, saying he wasn't present at the scene on the day of the murder. However, his DNA and fingerprints were found all over the house and on the tools used for dismemberment. Kwong Kao, the mastermind, appeared the calmest among the suspects. He remained silent during most interrogations, only saying he would wait to meet with a lawyer. With his experience as a former police officer, he knew exactly how to stay silent to avoid revealing information. Jenny Lee, the mother, cried and begged, saying she knew nothing about the murder and only came to the house to clean up after everything had happened. However, evidence showed she had actively deleted text messages and concealed evidence. Pang Wanyi, Alex's lover, was also arrested on charges of assisting a criminal in fleeing. She claimed she didn't know Alex had killed anyone and only thought he was in trouble with his old fraud case. Discovering more evidence. In the following days, police continued to search multiple locations related to the Kwong family. At the Kadoorie Hill apartment, the former object of dispute, they found financial documents revealing the case's motive. At another storage facility, they found more body parts hidden in plastic containers. In total, only about 70% of Abby Choi's body was found. The remaining 30% may have been completely destroyed, thrown into the sea, or buried somewhere. Police also traced digital evidence. Text messages between members of the Kwong family showed they had been discussing plans for months. Their internet search history included keywords like how to dispose of a corpse, industrial meat grinder, and chemicals to dissolve body tissue. Formal charges. After completing the initial investigation in March 2023, the Hong Kong Department of Justice formally charged the four main suspects with the following crimes: Alex Kwong Kong Chi and Kwong Kao. Murder. Anthony Kwong Kong Kit, murder and assisting criminals. Jenny Lee Sui-hung, perverting the course of justice. Additionally, lover Pang Wan-yi and the man Lau Wing-yi were charged with helping a criminal escape. Abby Choi's brother was also arrested on suspicion of helping to conceal evidence, but was later released due to insufficient proof. The lengthy trial process. The Abby Choi case became one of the most complex and closely watched cases in Hong Kong legal history. Preliminary hearings took place throughout 2023 and 2024, with numerous sessions to establish evidence and testimonies. In February 2025, the official trial finally began. During the trial, the defense lawyers for the accused attempted various strategies. They argued there was no direct evidence objectively proving the defendants had actually committed murder. They also contended that the relationship between Abby Choi and the Kwong family remained good, with no reason to kill her. However, forensic evidence, DNA, fingerprints, text messages, and especially the fact that they rented the house months in advance, exposed the truth. The prosecution team presented a clear picture of the motive, plan, and brutal actions of the defendants. Part 5. Aftermath and Lessons. The pain of those left behind. Abby Choi's death left a terrible wound for her family, especially her 4 children, the little ones now left motherless. The 2 older children, born from her marriage to Alex Kwong, now must face the truth that their biological father and paternal grandparents murdered their mother. Chris Tam, her current husband, stepped up to care for and raise all 4 children. He declared he would treat his wife's 2 older children as his own and would spend the rest of his life protecting them. His family also provided full support, ensuring the children could live in a safe and loving environment. Abby Choi's parents, who lost their only daughter, live in utter grief. They cannot comprehend why their daughter, someone who was always kind and generous, was harmed so brutally by the people she had loved. Lessons about kindness and boundaries. The Abby Choi case raises a painful question. Can kindness go too far? Abby Choi was a woman with a heart of gold. She had provided tens of millions of dollars to her ex-husband's family, helped them financially, and always treated them well. But her generous actions inadvertently created dependency and nurtured greed. When you continuously give without setting clear boundaries, you may be turning the recipients into parasites who view your help as an entitlement rather than a gift. And when that gift is threatened, they may react violently. This is not Abby Choi's fault. She did nothing wrong. But her story is a painful reminder about the need to set boundaries, even with family members. A warning about domestic violence. This case is also proof that the most dangerous people aren't always strangers. According to criminal statistics, the majority of murders occur between acquaintances, and the family is the most dangerous place. Abby Choi was murdered not by thieves or street criminals, but by the very people she trusted most. She got into a car driven by her ex-husband's brother without any suspicion. She entered the house they led her to without any worry. This is a reminder that we need to always be vigilant, even with family members. When there are financial disputes or serious conflicts, resolve them through legal means instead of trying to handle them personally. Social impact in Hong Kong. The Abby Choi case created a huge wave of shock in Hong Kong. It sparked debates about domestic violence, property rights in complex relationships, and the need to protect women from violence. Many social organizations have called on the government to strengthen measures to protect women, especially in divorce and property disputes. They also called for raising awareness about warning signs of domestic violence and ways for women to protect themselves. The Abby Choi case is not just a story about crime, but also a tragedy about betrayal, greed, and the price paid for kindness without boundaries. a young, talented, beautiful, and kind-hearted woman, had her life brutally taken by the very people she loved and supported. As of October 2025, the case is still in the trial process. The defendants still await final judgment from the court. Whatever the outcome, nothing can bring Abby Choi back to her family and her 4 young children. Her story is a painful reminder. Be kind, but also be wise. Help others, but don't forget to protect yourself. And most importantly, always set clear boundaries, even with your loved ones. If you, or someone you know, is in a relationship with signs of violence, serious property disputes, or feels threatened, seek help from lawyers, police, and rights protection organizations. No property is worth your life. This is the Case Files, where we explore real cases to draw lessons for life. Join us in future episodes to learn more about untold stories. Remember, live well, but also live safely. In apartment 4 of the housing block at 923 Hugang Avenue, a horrifying scream pierced through the Singapore night. A mother had just discovered her daughter lying in a pool of blood, gasping for breath after brutal stab wounds. But the perpetrator wasn't a robber or an enemy from outside. It was a 15-year-old boy, and behind the case was a sinister plan by the person the victim trusted most, her soon-to-be ex-husband. Welcome to the Case Files, where we explore real-life criminal cases that have shocked the world. I'm your host today. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most disturbing murder cases in Singapore's history, a country known for its extremely low crime rate and strict legal system. In this episode, we're taking a deep dive into the infamous case of the Puppet Master murder, the Anthony Ler case, the story of a ruthless manipulator who turned an innocent boy into a murder weapon, and the perfect act he staged to conceal his crime. Setting: Singapore in 2001. In 2001, Singapore was one of the safest countries in the world, with a murder rate of only 0.3 cases per 100,000 people, ranking top 5 globally for low crime rates, only after Switzerland, Hong Kong, Norway, and Bahrain. The nation was famous for its systematic education, rapid economic development, and especially its strict, unwavering law enforcement. But on the night of May 14, 2001, a case shook this island nation to its core. This wasn't just an ordinary murder, but a sophisticated conspiracy orchestrated by a master psychological manipulator. Main characters: a marriage in ruins. Anthony Ler, 34 years old, born in 1967, was the youngest of 4 children. His childhood wasn't particularly happy, as his parents divorced when he was young. He wasn't close to his siblings either, creating a withdrawn and manipulative personality. Annie Leong-Wai Mun, born in 1971, was a smart, lovely girl from childhood. At 15, she met Anthony, 4 years her senior, at a church. They got to know each other, fell in love, and married in 1995. On April 13, 1997, their first daughter was born. Annie quit her job at the bank, where she had a stable career, to focus on caring for their child and family. It seemed like a happy family had been formed. But in reality, this marriage harbored dangerous cracks from the very beginning. The collapse of a marriage. Despite his decent, bright appearance, Anthony had dark traits that Annie never knew about. He was passionate about business, but frequently failed. The family's savings were constantly drained by his business investments that went nowhere. But more seriously, Anthony began cheating around town. He met and got acquainted with a woman named Madame Higerin. This relationship didn't stop at secret dating. Anthony had the audacity to bring his mistress home and sleep in his own marital bedroom. After some time, Anthony found another female partner. They certainly didn't just do business together, but had an inappropriate relationship as well. Eventually, their business venture failed, and both parted ways. Thoroughly disappointed in her cheating husband, Annie moved back to her mother's house with their daughter in October 1999. But then in early 2000, Anthony attempted suicide with sleeping pills when his business ventures repeatedly failed. Hearing the news, Annie came to take care of him for a while. However, she no longer trusted him. For the sake of her daughter and her own future, Annie was determined to get divorced. In February 2001, she formally filed for divorce and fought for custody of their daughter. Anthony disagreed and constantly tried to delay signing the divorce papers. The relationship between the two became very tense, but Annie was adamant about wanting to be freed from this unhappy marriage as soon as possible. The sinister plan takes shape. But Annie couldn't know that her approaching freedom would become a nightmare, because Anthony had secretly been hatching a sinister plan. When abandoned by his wife, Anthony was drowning in debt. If Annie died, he would have full rights to the house worth $480,000 USD, over 11 billion Vietnamese dong, and full custody of their daughter. This was precisely the motive driving him to plan his wife's murder. In February 2001, Anthony began executing his scheme. He befriended a group of teenagers at a fast food store. This group included 5 boys: Z, 15 years old; Gavin Ung, 16 years old; Xiao, 22 years old; Kevin, 16 years old; and a 19-year-old boy. Anthony regularly met with them daily. He would often bring his white dog for walks and talk about murder. At first, the boys thought it was just a joke. Anthony asked if any of them dared to commit murder. When the boys asked how much they'd be paid, Anthony answered quickly, $100,000 USD. Mom recruiting a living weapon. First, Anthony approached Xiao, 22 years old. Initially, Xiao also thought Anthony was just joking, but one night, when Xiao came to Anthony's apartment, he was offered $100,000 to carry out the murder. Anthony said he would get the money from selling his apartment. Xiao advised Anthony to hire a professional assassin, and Anthony asked him to search for one. For 2 consecutive days, Anthony kept calling to check. Xiao realized Anthony's tone was very serious and not joking. This made him uncomfortable and surprised. Eventually, Xiao refused and said he couldn't find anyone. Next, Anthony approached Kevin, 16 years old, and Z, 15 years old. He brought Kevin to his apartment, opened the kitchen cabinet, and showed Kevin some knives that he considered most suitable for killing people. In the living room, Anthony took out a black Japanese knife and told Kevin to use it to cut a newspaper, reasoning that human neck skin is as thin as a sheet of newspaper. When Kevin couldn't do it, Anthony tried to teach the boy how to use the knife. But eventually, Kevin felt confused and afraid that Anthony would convince him, so he refused. He even tried calling Z to warn him about Anthony, but couldn't reach him. The final victim, a 15-year-old boy. Finally, Anthony found the living weapon he needed. Z, a 15-year-old boy who was skinny, tall, and gangly, and wore glasses. Z had known Anthony since he was only 10 years old and looked up to him as a role model. Anthony described the plan in detail to Z. Wear a helmet and gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. Wear long sleeves so the victim couldn't scratch him. Don't smoke at the scene as cigarette butts could leave fingerprints and saliva. After committing the crime, take valuable items like wallets to fake a robbery. Don't panic when leaving. Walk to the bus stop like a normal person. Finally, clean the murder weapon thoroughly and dispose of it. There had been 2 times when Z couldn't kill Annie because he hesitated upon seeing Annie with her daughter. Z told Anthony he couldn't do it. However, Anthony threatened him. If he didn't comply, Z's relatives would be harmed, and Z would also be killed because he knew too much of the plan. Terrified, Z agreed to carry out Anthony's plan. The fateful night, May 14, 2001. At 11 p.m. on May 14, 2001, Anthony came to his wife's house at 923 Hugang Avenue. He said there were some agreements related to real estate that needed his wife's signature and also related to the divorce. Annie and her daughter were living with her mother on the 4th floor. Anthony requested to meet Annie in the lobby on the 1st floor. When Annie came down in the elevator with her daughter to sign papers, Anthony said he didn't bring a pen, so he requested she go upstairs to get a pen and leave their daughter to play downstairs. Annie was very angry and annoyed, but she wanted to get divorced as soon as possible, so she decided to go upstairs to get a pen. Before stepping into the elevator, she turned to look back at her daughter. But she couldn't know that this was the last time she would see her beloved child. According to the prearranged plan, Z had been hiding in the stairwell waiting. When Annie stepped out of the elevator on the 4th floor, Z, wearing a helmet covering his face, lunged out from the stairwell with a long knife. He slashed a deep wound across her neck and stabbed repeatedly into her chest. Then, Z fled using the stairs. The perfect act. Despite being severely injured, Annie managed to crawl to her mother's door. Her mother heard knocking and opened the door to witness a horrifying scene. Her daughter lying in a pool of blood, breathing weakly. She screamed for help. At this point, Anthony on the 1st floor panicked and carried his daughter up to the 4th floor. He also began screaming and running to his wife. An ambulance was called, but Annie died after a few hours at the hospital. At Annie's funeral, Anthony cried miserably and constantly said he was a terrible husband who couldn't take care of his wife and child and had cheated on her. He even called himself an evil demon and called his wife a kind angel. He constantly blamed himself with what-if statements to make everyone sympathize with him. Anthony appeared like a professional actor, performing almost perfectly to deceive the entire Singapore public. The investigation. Truth gradually emerges. Police began investigating according to standard procedure. In cases involving the death of a spouse, the surviving partner is usually the prime suspect. Moreover, Anthony and Annie's marriage was on the verge of collapse. However, Anthony had a perfect alibi. Annie was killed on the 4th floor while Anthony was playing with his daughter on the 1st floor. But Anthony's confrontational attitude and unwillingness to cooperate during questioning increased police suspicions. The first clue emerged when police found a piece of newspaper folded into a thin strip in the hallway at the crime scene. This piece matched the newspaper in Anthony's house. When asked, Anthony said he didn't know about this. Police took the entire newspaper from Anthony's house and tested it. Results confirmed that the newspaper piece found at the crime scene was indeed from the newspaper in Anthony's house. However, this still wasn't enough evidence to convict him. The breakthrough. Confession. On May 18, 2001, 4 days after Annie was murdered, police caught the killer. Because he was underage, his identity was kept secret, and he was called Z-Bo. Under police interrogation and pressure, Z finally admitted to his crime. More importantly, he revealed that all of this was directed by Anthony. With the existing evidence, police formally issued an arrest warrant for Anthony the next day. On May 19, 2001, Anthony and Z were officially charged with murder. Undeniable evidence. During the investigation, evidence against Anthony kept mounting. Testimony from the teenagers. All 4 boys Anthony had contacted testified in court. They stated that Anthony met with them regularly, talked about murder topics, and asked if anyone dared commit murder for $100,000. Testimony from his mistress. Mem Higuerin, Anthony's mistress, testified in court that during their 3 years of acquaintance, she had repeatedly heard Anthony say he would kill her and kill his wife if she took their daughter away. When she asked if he was serious about these things, Anthony said, yes. Computer evidence. police recovered deleted Microsoft Word files from Anthony's computer. These contained details of conversations between Anthony and Z about payment, 3 days after the crime. Worried about police surveillance, Anthony had Z sit beside him and type, then deleted the text afterward. The historic trial. At trial, Anthony still insisted that what he said was just stupid jokes. A dare of bravery. He never expected anyone to think his words were real and commit the crime. When the judge asked why Anthony didn't bring a pen that night, he contradicted himself in his testimony. First saying he didn't have a habit of carrying pens, but when asked how he would sign documents, he said he planned to borrow a pen from a nearby convenience store, then changed his story, saying Annie herself wanted to go upstairs to get a pen. Mr. Tae Yong-kwang, a member of Singapore's Judicial Committee, didn't believe any of Anthony's explanations. He said, "The expressions of shock, concern for the dying Annie, and tears at the funeral were just performances by a talented actor." Sentence and consequences. On December 6, 2001, Anthony was sentenced to death for abetment of murder, inciting murder. Zeid was sentenced to indefinite detention at the president's pleasure because he was still a minor. Anthony appealed to the Court of Appeal, but was rejected after only 7 minutes of deliberation on March 4, 2002. At 6 a.m. on December 13, 2002, Anthony was executed by hanging until death. He never admitted to his crime, instead maintaining a cheerful smile throughout the trial. As for Z, he was sad and remorseful about his crime. "I wish I had never met Anthony. I disappointed my parents and everyone around me. I don't know what people will think of me. I feel lost and confused." Throughout his sentence, Z found hope and matured. He even got a college degree and achieved the title of model prisoner. Z applied for clemency for the first time in 2013, but was rejected. In November 2017, Z applied for clemency again. This time, with Singapore media attention, many people spoke up in support. On November 2, 2018, after nearly 17 years in prison, Z was granted clemency by the President of Singapore. To protect the rights of minors who commit crimes, Z was given a new name and lives a new life. The Anthony Ler case isn't just a story about greed and cruelty, but also a bitter lesson about the power of psychological manipulation. An evil man turned a 15-year-old boy into a murder weapon, destroying not only the victim's life, but also the future of that child. Annie and Anthony's daughter, after the incident, was raised by her grandmother and grew up. However, lacking parental love from childhood will surely become a pain that she can never heal from in her entire life. This case is also proof of the strictness of Singapore's legal system, where justice is carried out decisively and without mercy for crime. What do you think about this case? Can someone who manipulated children to commit crimes ever be forgiven? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss other shocking cases. See you in the next episode of The Case Files. Thank you for listening.